There is one passenger train that operates in the state of Oklahoma. And no, I don't just mean one route, I mean one train. And hey, there it is. Each morning, Amtrak's Heartland Flyer departs from the Oklahoma City Santa Fe Depot. It arrives in Fort Worth in the afternoon, and in the evening, it begins its return trip to Oklahoma City, arriving in about 4 hours. But this once-a-day train begs a question. Who even rides this thing? Sure, it's a fun way to travel if you want to go on a weekend trip, especially if you happen to live in one of the towns that's lucky enough to have a station along the route. For example, it's a cheap and safe way for OU students to travel from Norman down to the Lone Star State to witness a particular football rivalry unfold firsthand. So the train is great for casual intercity travel, but what about commuting? Well, despite all odds, I have done it. Over the past several months, I took this train 43 times, replacing what would have otherwise been a total of 2,236 miles of driving my car to and from class all by myself. This is the story of how I became, to my knowledge, the only train commuter in the state of Oklahoma. Well, for a few months. Also, weirdly, if you like to see some mild destruction, this might be the episode for you. Welcome to eryngo.urbanism. Allow me to formally introduce you to the Amtrak Heartland Flyer. As you already learned at the beginning of the video, it runs one daily train from OKC to Fort Worth and back. It runs on a BNSF right-of-way, which once hosted the Texas Chief, which ran daily trains in both directions and connected as far as Galveston and Chicago. After discontinuation of the old route in the 1970s and a 2-decade service gap, the Heartland Flyer finally revived the service on this small segment back in 1999. Fun fact, the name Heartland Flyer was actually suggested by 11-year-old Katie Moore as a part of a Name the Train contest. Anyways, enough about history. What's it like to ride this thing? Well, I'd actually taken it once before, from Norman to Fort Worth as a part of a class trip, just a few months prior to all of the first shutdowns back in 2020. And at the time, I thought it was awesome. I've always been a bit of a casual train enthusiast, but as a Tulsa native, it never even really occurred to me that there might be a daily passenger train that I could go and ride somewhere in the state of Oklahoma.
I had been on the Heartland Flyer once before as a little kid. You know, we went to the Fort Worth Zoo, made a day trip out of it. And I'm pretty sure that early vague memory is like probably why I love Norman so much.
This is Will. He's a friend of mine. And he's a bit of a train enthusiast as well. He's particularly enamored with the Americana aspect of railroads and their role in the overall folk mythos of Oklahoma and the Old West. Unsurprisingly, he's also a big advocate for passenger rail. His experience taking the Heartland Flyer down to Fort Worth was a bit more memorable than mine.
My girlfriend and I were going to go see Dead & Company in Dallas. It was a fairly kosher trip down. We got up Friday morning, put on our backpacks, and walked from our house to the station. How cool is it? We're not gonna have to drive a car on this whole trip, you know, trains and Ubers. All of our friends got stuck in traffic, and we were on the train. So we got to Fort Worth around noon or so, and we had oodles and oodles of time to kill, while everybody else was stuck on 35 just trying to get into town. The next day, we checked out of our hotel and we were going to take the return train back. So it left Dallas. Everything was going smooth again. It was the same crew that had driven or taken us the day before. It was like right 7 p.m. on the dot, because we had just crossed back into Oklahoma. I start hearing, he's just laying on the horn. And I look out the window and I see a white semi-cab. And I just remember, I had enough time to think, there's not a trailer attached to that, is there? And then I start to feel the braking, and yeah, it was crazy. One of the cars off the car hauler, flew through the air and hit a window, and the window was across the aisle 2 rows ahead. There was a kid taking a nap, and he was reclined. And I feel like if he hadn't been reclined, he just would have gotten bodied by that window. He still got a concussion. Conductor came through, and he was just like, hey, we hit a truck. First responders are on their way. I think we've got, 1 or 2 people that had to have medical attention, including the actual engineer that was driving. It wasn't Amtrak's fault in the slightest. The dude got the car hauler stuck. He called the local, the police or whatever. They got in contact with the train. It was just too late.
Despite the unexpected delay, Will still looks back on this trip with fondness, and he's still staunchly in favor of passenger rail. And why shouldn't he? I mean, if you think about it, would you rather smash full speed into a car hauler in a train or in your car? Yeah, I'd pick the train every single time. So back to the topic at hand. How did I manage to work this train into a commute? It had occurred to me back in the summer that I might be able to take the Amtrak to Norman in the morning and get there in time for the class that I had. So after doing a bit of research, I figured out that I could cycle to the Santa Fe Depot by 8:20 a.m. and the train would get me to Norman by 8:45 for a ticket cost of around $4 to $5. Then I could walk to campus, arriving around 9:10 a.m. This would make me about 20 minutes early to my 9:30 a.m. class. Then after class, I just have to catch the return trip at 8:49 p.m. Okay, so here's the problem with a once-a-day train. If it's not coming through town right when you need it, you're pretty much out of luck. Much to my chagrin, I knew that spending all day in Norman was not an option because I still needed to go to work in Oklahoma City in the afternoons. Luckily, Embark, the transit agency which operates both Oklahoma City and Norman bus systems, saved the day. You see, Embark runs an express bus back and forth between the two cities. The number 24, also known as the Sooner Express. After looking up a bit of info on the 24, I found that it cost $3 to ride, and its final Norman stop was at the Brook Street transfer station, just a few blocks away from where my class was. To me, this was even more convenient than the Amtrak station, which is downtown in Norman. That's great. All I'd need to do is get there before the bus leaves at 10:16 a.m., which was 4 minutes before my class ends. Okay, so that's not gonna work. I wasn't about to plan on consistently leaving class like 10 minutes early to walk to the bus station, or hedge my bets that the bus may or may not be late. So the obvious solution is just to catch the next one at 12:24 p.m. That bus would then get me back to OKC around 1, and from there, I could walk to retrieve my bike from the train station and cycle to work. So that was the plan. Now you might be thinking, what are you gonna do with those extra 2 hours before the bus gets there? And to me, it made perfect sense to just use this time to hang out at the library, eat some lunch, and work on editing some videos. At first, my girlfriend was skeptical of the plan, but I insisted that I would try it for a week and see how it goes. And if you haven't guessed yet, it went very well. Now, the weather might have been unbearably hot that first week, but I got up bright and early nonetheless and rode my bike to the train station. I went up onto the platform, showed my ticket, and got on the train. I took a first day of school photo for my mom, and before I knew it, we were off. Here's the Skydance Bridge, here's a skyline shot of OKC, and on the first day, I recorded a lot of B-roll, some of which you've already seen if you've been following the channel. One weird thing that I did not expect to see the very first day was a derailed BNSF freight train just kind of laying there on the side of the track. It was super interesting and definitely not something that you'd expect to see this up close very often. I was also surprised that the wreckage was almost fully cleaned up in a little over a week. We arrived in Norman on schedule and I walked to class. Over the first few weeks, I experimented with several different walking routes to campus, and I ultimately decided that I prefer this one because it's a nice, wide, mixed-use path that connects directly to campus through Campus Corner. It's just the most enjoyable walking path overall, even though it's not technically the most direct. On one of the days I deviated from this path, I did get to see a demolition taking place, so that was kind of interesting. But overall, the train journey to class was awesome from day one through the end of the semester. The train was dependable, fast, comfortable, and my only real complaint is that for some reason, the train doesn't have Wi-Fi, but I can work with a hotspot. But now, it's time to talk about the bus. So for the first several weeks, taking the bus was pretty straightforward. I would go to the Brook Street transfer station, stand awkwardly nearby so that I could be in the shade of a tree while catching some breeze to keep me cool. I'd wait for the 24 to show up and hop on board. At first I was somewhat surprised that this was just a normal city bus and not some kind of fancy coach bus, but then I remembered that we don't really like to fund our transit agencies sufficiently around these parts. Speaking of which, over the next few weeks, the drivers were fairly inconsistent. There were probably 5 to 10 different drivers over the course of these weeks, some of whom were incredibly punctual and on time, and some of whom were consistently inconsistent. In fact, our second week, one day the bus was literally half an hour late. But generally, the bus running late tended to be a good thing. One day I even managed to catch the early bus so I could get back to work a couple of hours early. On October 16th, I knew ahead of time that Norman was overhauling its bus service. When I hopped off the train that morning, I actually went straight over to check out the new bus station, and I even made a TikTok about it. But when I made that video, there was something I hadn't realized yet. I had double and triple checked all of the available information online, and nothing I found seemed to indicate that there would be any changes at all to the Route 24. See, my understanding is that the Route 24 is operated by the OKC Transit Agency, whereas the Norman buses are operated separately, even though all of the branding is under Embark. But anyway, when I got out of class, I trusted my research and assumed that the OKC-operated 24 bus would continue as usual through the old Brook Street transfer station. So I hung out at my usual spot at the library and began my walk over to the station around 12:20. Well, it turns out I was wrong, and instead it stopped at the new bus station, which is downtown and a 30-minute walk from where I was when I found out about that. I hopped on a scooter, I got there as fast as I could, and luckily when I got there, the 24 was sitting there ready to head out. Luckily it was a few minutes late. If it had been on time, I would have missed it. But now that the route had changed, I needed to figure out my game plan going forward. See, technically the transit center is a convenient place to get from campus by bus because there's two bus routes, the 111, which stops on the east side of campus every 30 minutes, and the 112, which stops on the west side of campus every hour. Both of these buses end at the new bus station. The only problem is that both of these buses get there at 12:30, which is 6 minutes after the 24 is supposed to depart back to OKC. Despite this, I figured I'd give it a shot, starting with the 112 because the campus stop is, well, nicer. However, the day I tried it, the 112 was running late and it was making me incredibly nervous that it was going to make me late for my transfer. Luckily, the 24 was running even later. I ran from the 112 to the 24 and I made it. The next week, I tried taking the 111, and since it's a half-hour frequency bus, I figured I could just take the earlier one and get there 24 minutes early, which is not optimal, but it's better than being late. After trying this one a couple of times, it occurred to me, there's a coffee shop right next to the bus station. From that point forward, the solution was obvious. I just began walking over to the coffee shop immediately after class and spending the remaining hour and a half of my lunch break sipping coffee and enjoying the chill vibes while getting work done. My friend Caylor, who had been meeting up with me regularly at the library, was also appreciative of the change of scenery. I even convinced him to try out the 112 from campus one day, which he described as a downright pleasant experience, despite getting a large bruise from the bus driver accelerating before he was able to take a seat. So that was that. Bike, train, walk, class, walk, coffee, bus, walk, bike, work, bike, home. Well, during my last week of class, the 24 route changed one more time. This time it was the OKC end of the route that was updated at the same time that the new BRT service began in Northwest OKC. This one was technically an improvement as it streamlined the 24 route and changed it to a clock-face service, now departing from Norman every other hour at 51 after. However, this newly optimized route eliminated the stop I usually took near the Amtrak station, meaning I would have to ride it all the way to the end of the line, which added about 20 minutes to the ride for me, plus the time it took to walk all the way back to where I left my bike. So basically, here's what I learned. We need commuter rail in OKC. Don't get me wrong, the bus is fine, but all of the route changes and inconsistencies due to traffic or inexperienced drivers left me feeling honestly a bit defeated on several occasions. Alternatively, the train was nearly 100% dependable, and the route was exactly the same every single day. City buses are also not the most comfortable vehicles to ride in on the highway, whereas trains can be quite comfortable. And while the new Norman bus station is pretty nice, the historic train stations are even nicer. The whole experience just confirmed to me that multimodal commuting, especially over a long distance, is a far superior experience to driving. To be fair, all of this does in fact take a bit longer than it would take to drive, but you have to consider that I'm getting more out of my time. While I'm cycling and walking, that's exercise. Plus, while I'm walking, I can pretty safely browse on Instagram or watch a YouTube video on my phone. On the train and bus, I'd usually pull out my laptop and be able to get some productive work done on my videos or read a book. None of these things would have been possible if I had spent an hour of my day driving, aside from maybe listening to a podcast or part of an audiobook. I also want to mention the cost. With the Amtrak tickets averaging around $5 per trip and the Sooner Express tickets costing $3 per trip, I was commuting 142 miles per week for only $24. That's 17 cents a mile, which is pretty similar to what you'd pay for gas. However, if you factor in all of the hidden costs of driving that proponents of car-centric infrastructure want us to conveniently forget about, the multimodal approach is way cheaper. To bring this story full circle, I want to draw your attention back to something I just said a few seconds ago. The train was nearly 100% dependable. Here's where I have to admit that the train was 100% dependable, aside from 2 days. One of these days, the train was about 15 minutes late to Norman because it had to park somewhere and wait for a BNSF freight train to pass by. Basically the kind of delay you'd expect from an Amtrak experience. But there was one more time this train let me down. On my very last day of class, I awoke to a text from Amtrak stating that a lengthy delay of 1 hour and 30 minutes is expected. Disappointed, I just hopped in my car and drove instead. When I got out of class, I received yet another text saying that the train had finally departed. It was this text that gave me an idea. I began walking to the edge of campus, past the Brook Street transfer station where the bus used to pick me up, and just past the OU duck pond. It's here, less than a 15-minute walk from the heart of campus, that I found what I was looking for: a set of train tracks. This would be the perfect location for a commuter rail station. No half-hour walk to the center of downtown Norman required. A station here could be both beautiful and incredibly convenient for OU students and professors, providing them access to the entirety of what OKC has to offer. Yes, one individual passenger train already passes through here twice a day. Norman is technically served by passenger rail, but imagine if a frequent, convenient, and reliable service truly served the campus of the largest university in the state. At that point, I wouldn't be the crazy one for taking the train. The real insanity would be those still taking I-35. In fact, I don't think freeways should be plowing through the centers of our cities under any circumstances. To learn about one city that has already removed one of its urban freeways, make sure to check out this video. And if you'd like to support the creation of more videos like these, make sure to check out my Patreon or join the Discord. Thanks again to all of my current supporters. You guys are the best.